this is an issue where Freedom House has like 2 40-minute presentations. And I came down here and said, what, did they want to hear the one on human trafficking or what Freedom House does? Oh, both of them. All the time. So I'm trying to be really quick. As Mike mentioned, I was active duty Coast Guard for a long time. And just to give you a brief picture of how I became exposed to the issue of human trafficking, what it is, what motivated me to get involved. Many, many years ago, on my first patrol on the Bering Sea, the ship that I was on had interdicted a Korean fishing vessel, and we were taking them into a U.S. port, and it was a commercial fishing vessel. And it was during the 4-day custody patrol that we had to bring them into Dutch Harbor, Alaska. We realized that some of the Indonesian crew members on board were there as basically indentured servants. And they, in very limited English, had kind of explained that to us and had asked if they could get asylum. Of course, the Coast Guard doesn't adjudicate that, but there was State Department people that meet them at the pier. And this is before we had something called a T visa, which is a visa for victims of human trafficking. Asylum wouldn't really apply here because you'd have to have fear of political persecution in your home country. These guys were basically pressed into bonded labor. It was a very sad situation. And for years, I thought, of all the work that we do to interdict human traffickers, to break up human trafficking networks, to try to interrupt criminal activities, what are we doing for the survivors? What are we doing for the people who are actually the victims of human trafficking? And so that's kind of what motivated me when I moved out here for a civilian job and left active duty. I thought, I'll have all this time on my hands. How wrong I was. To get involved in an organization that helps human trafficking victims. And that's kind of what moved me to be involved in Freedom House. So to give you guys a little bit of a background on how expansive the topic of human trafficking is, the next couple slides are going to have a lot of numbers, but I just ask you to keep one in mind, 529. And I'll get to what that is later, but if you want to even jot that down, 529, that's a number to kind of keep in the back of your mind. You'll also see a lot of the stats we have. Some of the studies are years and years apart, and they're everything from California initiatives to State Department to international nonprofit organizations. It's a very nebulous topic. It's very difficult for us to understand exactly how broad and how far-reaching this is, or exactly how many people it impacts. We estimate that there are probably up to 800,000 people who are trafficked across a border every year. Now that doesn't mean how many people are in some form of human slavery, but just as far as moving across borders, up to 800,000 people. And if you look at this, percentages of people who are affected, 70% of them are female, 50% are children. That tells you that human traffickers are going after the most vulnerable people in any population, people who don't otherwise have a voice. This one is really mind-blowing. 27 million humans are estimated to be in slavery worldwide. That's greater than the entire population of the city of Tokyo at any given time. Most victims between 18 and 24. And I'm not going to get to all of these, but I just say, think about what you would press someone into a human trafficking situation for, whether it's sex trafficking or labor trafficking. 18 to 24 is that kind of prime target age. It's the same reason why we see most farm workers enter agricultural work and heavy equipment work and factory work at around that time, because the body is mature enough to support work over a long period of time. It's also an age of sexual maturity. Right? There's a reason why 18 to 24 is the prime demographic that we see recruited into the military. And I'm not saying the militaries are human trafficking organizations. Half of us here have been in the military, but you can tell an 18-year-old to go do something and he'll just laugh it off and get it done. That's the age group that a trafficker is going to look for. And of course, the saddest of all these is for every 800 people trafficked, there's probably only one person that ends up actually being convicted. That's often because traffickers move more than one person, but it's extremely difficult to find traffickers and to bring them to prosecution. And the reason why this is, or why trafficking is so pervasive, is it's all about the money. It is third only to arms trafficking and illegal drugs trafficking as far as a money maker when you're looking at international organized crime. And of course, if you're a human trafficker, you're probably going to also be involved in either drugs trafficking, cash smuggling, illicit finance, arms trafficking. I see a lot of this in my my day-to-day work now. I specifically look at information about transnational criminal organizations. The thing about a human being is, as opposed to a package of drugs that you sell once and you get money from and you're done with it, now you got to go find more drugs. A human being is kind of a reusable resource, the way a trafficker looks at it. And we've seen a lot with maritime smuggling from Mexico into the U.S. and over the border at land crossings. Very often, coyotes, human smugglers, will attempt to get a human through first to see if it's a viable route for drug trafficking. So, in other words, hey, you know what? If I lose drugs, now I have no way to make money from this thing. I've lost my resources. If I lose a human, okay, there's more where that came from, and they can kind of take care of themselves. So we see human smuggling routes that are often used as kind of a precursor for drugs and weapons. So what is human trafficking? Well, there's basically, as I mentioned, it's all about making money from something. There's two big kinds, if you're to try to pare it down to only two categories: sex trafficking and labor trafficking. But it can happen from recruitment to transfer or transportation to just helping to receive people. Those are the acts that people do to move people or to trade people or sell people. The means they do them, and we'll hit on some of these terms in a minute here. Force, fraud, and coercion are the three big terms from the means category. And the purpose of exploitation, forced labor and sexual exploitation are by far the greatest of those two. So at the bottom, removal of organs, that always gets people's eyebrows up. We don't see a whole lot of that in the U.S. I don't have any current information about that. That is not something that we see too often in the U.S. But in parts of Southeastern Europe in the 90s, that was a big scare. In parts of Asia, that may still be a problem. Force, fraud, and coercion. All right, that's the main way you're getting a otherwise willing, autonomous human being to sacrifice their own freedom. Well, most people have this image of human trafficking occurring like we see in a movie with Liam Neeson. Somebody is forcibly kidnapped and they're brought somewhere and they're sold. Right? That does happen, and that is typically associated with other criminal activity. Coercion is usually how you keep someone in a traffic situation, threatening to harm someone's family back in their home country, or threatening to harm them if they don't perform what you want them to do. But overwhelmingly, the most common way that people are brought into trafficking is by fraud. And we see this in California very often. People come here legitimately and legally on student visas. They come into the country, they get off an airplane, they check in with CBP at the airport, and they're not hiding anything at all. They come here to think they're doing one job, only to find out, okay, they're meeting with someone who's now holding their visa, and they're actually not being trained in this medical procedure they thought. Instead, they're working in a massage parlor or a brothel instead. And they're told, well, you'll be deported forcibly or we'll hurt your family back home. So fraud, tricking people into it is way more common. Sex trafficking and labor trafficking, as I mentioned, the two big categories we split this into. Prostitution, brothels, and massage parlors by far are probably the lead of sex trafficking incidents that we see here in California, specifically in the Bay Area. And some of this does not even mean that someone has to be brought into the country. The overwhelming majority of people that we see at Freedom House as survivors of human trafficking are U.S. persons. They're born and raised right here in the Bay Area, and especially in parts of our area where we have a huge gang presence. Very often gangs will actually, gosh, there's no way to say this without, it's not really a rated G conversation. Pimps within gangs will trade prostitutes with other gang members to try to settle up a gang dispute, or they'll pimp women into prostitution as a way to make money for the gang that can then lead to other criminal enterprises. That's a huge problem we see, especially in, not as much in San Francisco and San Mateo County, as much as in Alameda County and Contra Costa County. They have a really big problem with that. Labor trafficking is probably more prevalent, but frankly, it's very difficult to see. It's very difficult to find. We don't have as many prosecutions for labor trafficking as we do for sex trafficking. And one of the reasons is very simply, sex trafficking has to announce itself because you're looking for a third party. You're looking for a customer who interacts directly with that trafficking victim. Labor trafficking, we as consumers are going to buy something in a grocery store. We don't have to see the labor trafficking that may be happening on a garlic farm in Gilroy, or someone who's peddling fruit on the streets. There was a huge case in San Jose back in, and San Francisco back in 2009 through 10, where children who had entered the country illegally from Mexico were basically recruited into working as fruit vendors on the streets in San Jose and San Francisco, kept in something that would only charitably be called a dormitory kind of situation. About 15 of them in the same one-bedroom house and sharing chores together, not being able to be in contact with their family, not being paid for their work. But it's very difficult to see that. Sex trafficking, essentially it's a commercial sex act that is, I guess the only way I put the general categorization on this is it's not someone's choice to be involved in that level of intimacy. Very often sex traffickers can be familial. In fact, I have worked with a young woman who's done some of these presentations with me who, when she was, I think she was 2 years old, she was sexually abused for the first time by her father. When she was 8 years old, her mother and father both started pimping her out. And they actually made her sign a contract about that she would keep quiet. This is incredible. People think that, okay, this woman must have been living in some sort of crazy squalor. Nope. She was a honor student at her high school in a very well-to-do area in the South Bay. She was on the U.S. Women's Junior Soccer program, and she went to Berkeley. And when she went to Berkeley is when she first realized, oh, wait a minute, hold on. This stuff that I've been doing with my family is not actually normal. She's in her dorm room in her first week and telling her roommates, this is so weird, I don't have to check out with anybody. And they were like, oh yeah, I mean, we're all here with our parents, we're all college freshmen. But like, what do you mean? And they started asking her about things. She started to reveal that she had been trafficked from a very young age by her own family. So there's not, I mean, that's reprehensible. It's an anomaly, but it's not so much of an anomaly that it's the only situation we've seen. The graphics aren't really showing up too well here. I hope you guys can read this up. There's supposed to be a map of the U.S. behind this. You're not missing anything. The last 2 years within the state of California, our task forces have identified 1,200 some victims. 72% of them were from the U.S. And again, another thing to keep in mind here, the average age of entry into prostitution is 12 to 13 years old. So as soon as someone hits puberty, essentially, this is when a trafficker will look at that as a time to start exploiting someone. Forced labor, again, this can be either to repay a smuggling debt to get into the country. It can be on a work scheme that you came into the country for thinking that you were going to get some sort of training, and all of a sudden you're indebted to your smuggler or someone that's holding your visa, and when the visa expires, now you're indebted to them. This more often involves men. Just because there's simply, from a biological standpoint, there's more labor that you can harvest from the frame of a healthy adult male than from a woman. But there are certainly a lot of women who are in labor trafficking situations as well. And again, just into the U.S., we're estimating, from State Department figures from, I think this is from a 2010 study, possibly as high as 17,500 human beings trafficked into the U.S. every year. Again, 72% of the victims that the task forces in California are finding from the U.S. So if we're only looking at this many people coming into the U.S. to be trafficked, then there's even more than that number trafficked at any given time. I mentioned a lot of things about what's the makeup of a trafficking victim. There is no one typical makeup, but one thing that is definitely true is any kind of an instability in someone's life, whether they've been, especially for juveniles, in the foster care system, they've been runaways, they have a drug addiction problem that either preceded the trafficking situation or was exacerbated by the trafficking situation. Any one of those, what I would call vectors of instability, a trafficker will play on to make it easier to exploit someone. So a lot of the women that we've seen in Freedom House have been in and out of the foster care system where they've been runaways. There's a lot of homeless youth who are exploited. And in the Bay Area, we have, actually I'll say in the state of California, 80% of the trafficking cases that we see are in our major urban areas, San Diego, Los Angeles, especially with their proximity to the border, are huge on this, and San Francisco as well. San Francisco and Oakland and San Jose, I'd actually say is a better descriptor of that than just San Francisco. You have a lot of recent immigrant communities. You have a lot of ethnic enclaves that are naturally suspicious of law enforcement or of government because of their own cultural mores. And some of these communities are so insular that people don't have a way to report out of them. Again, I'm trying to move quickly through this, but just to give you a picture, this one was really illustrative to us about some of the victims that we see. As I mentioned, we get a lot of referrals from services in the East Bay and from people coming into our system from Alameda County and Contra Costa County. So from 2011 to 2012, of 267 cases, some of these obviously they're sharing in common, 64% right there in Alameda County. They did not have to travel all the way across the world to find themselves exploited in traffic. 84% were runaways. 40% were substance abuse, had a history of substance abuse. 38% had been victimized before being trafficked, and that is very sad to me to think that these are very often young women and girls who have a horrible situation in their home or personal lives to begin with, and this is the next step for them. Obviously, mental health challenges are a huge issue. 99% of those victims were girls. The huge majority of them were under 18 years old. Again, the race and ethnicity category, people always ask about this. I don't think this is really too illustrative overall. Probably more so of demographics in Alameda County than you'd see nationwide. 66% African American. As I mentioned before, a lot of the black gangs in Oakland in particular are involved in trafficking amongst each other to resolve gang disputes or even to support criminal enterprise. Foster care, as I mentioned, is another factor. Juvenile probation. There are a lot of stumbling blocks that people have to get past to begin with. So, what are we doing about this at a national level? Well, in the last 5 years, there's been a huge increase in focus on human trafficking. Here in California, our state attorney general has made combating human trafficking a big focus of hers. Prop 35 is the law that we passed very recently here in California. It's not a perfect law, but it brings prosecution standards that are in line with what we see in the federal government. So we can try to prosecute at the state level as well. And this is where that number 529 comes in, right? 529 beds nationwide on any given night are set aside specifically for victims of human trafficking. So think about all the human trafficking victims we have in the country at any given time, and where most of them go, where they are found or referred, are typically to homeless shelters, or domestic violence shelters, or drug rehab centers, or wherever they can take them. I don't know if you guys have spent any time in homeless shelters, or near them, or worked with them at all, but that is not always the safest place to be. In fact, there's a very strong chance that someone is going to be further exploited, or at least exposed to some sort of violence or crime in a homeless shelter. So having a place for them to go that's designed for them is we think, very important, which leads to Freedom House. So, and I know I'm running down less than 10 minutes here, so I'll try to make this quick. Freedom House was established in 2010. We have 2 facilities, and the one we just opened up is a home for minors in Santa Clara County, but the one we opened in 2010 in San Mateo County is for female adult survivors of human trafficking. I believe we have housed over 70 women since opening, and we've helped or provided legal assistance or referral or social services to over 150 women since then. Women can stay up to 18 months. That's really not a very hard deadline. We have one woman that I've worked with who stayed for over 2.5 years. Some women are ready to move on to something else after only a month or 2. It really kind of depends on what kind of situation they're in and what their state is. Again, pretty much tracks what we were seeing before. 73% of our residents have been U.S. born. We need to update our pie chart here because it says sex trafficking 86%, labor trafficking 14%. Anybody who knows a pie chart knows that I have to adjust that. I couldn't quite figure out how to move that around in the PowerPoint here. So the Nest is the one we just opened. The Monarch is the one for adults. The Nest is the one for minors. We can take girls aged 12 to 17. They can stay indefinitely until they turn 18. There's not an 18-month and you have to move on to something else limit there. If they're in care with us when they're 17 years old and they're 18 and they still need care, we would anticipate moving them to the Monarch. This is in Santa Clara County, and Santa Clara County has been very involved with regulating how Freedom House is going to operate there. When you're working with minors, there's a whole other level of certifications, and both good and bad, that you have to get. A lot of things you have to get in line. So Santa Clara County, it said for every one resident you take in from outside of Santa Clara County, you have to take in one from Santa Clara County as well. So they want this really focused on helping people who need that locally. Well, we take referrals from all over the place, and we don't always have a one-for-one match. This isn't bad. I'm not going to be political about this, but I'll just say I appreciate that Santa Clara County has a focus on helping locally, but there's a greater need than to just try to match it with something right there. As I mentioned, oops, back. I'll go back here. Okay, let me just do this.
Yeah. Go up. Good job.
Okay. The nest is open, or the nest opened this past summer because even with having run Freedom House for adult survivors for 3 years, our founder realized there's a whole other community that we need to help, even more vulnerable than the adult female survivors that we've been working with. So as I mentioned before, when a girl typically enters a forced prostitution or trafficking situation, she can be as young as 13 years old. The average life expectancy after entry into prostitution is only 7 years. I mean, this is just a very, very dangerous situation. You're the most vulnerable part of the population, and you're entering its most dangerous areas. Either a drug overdose, or more often, violence on the street at the hands of either the clientele or the pimp is one of the most dangerous things that we see. So, the people who are coming into the nest, and again, this applies to the Monarch as well, U.S. citizens and foreign nationals. We have, as I mentioned at the very beginning of the presentation, for all the success we can have with law enforcement, that really focuses on catching the bad guys. As a nation, I think we're very motivated by prosecution. You know, we see a TV show about cops, and that's kind of our mindset is, let's go get the bad guys. Well, that is kind of the easiest part of the job. And then there are years and years and years of helping people who've been hurt. And there's not a whole lot that happens. If we don't get them the kind of counseling that they need, they're very often going to be coming back into that same very dangerous situation. So survivors are coming in through referrals from law enforcement. We have a tremendous partnership with the San Francisco Police Department, San Jose Sheriffs. San Jose PD has been very active from the very beginning, as has Alameda County Sheriff and Oakland PD. It's really been key to us to try to engage with our local partners. And also with other nonprofits throughout the area. They've been absolutely critical in helping us out. So once people come into Freedom House, the basic model here is, what are the basic needs? What do they need right now? Do they need to see a doctor? Do they need a roof over their head? Are we going to find a bed for them? And then we get to case management and reintegration. For basic needs, it can be things like, hey, a lot of these women who've been sexually abused and exploited for years have never been to a OBGYN. And that is something that is like, wow, this is probably the most important first thing we should do. Assess some first aid, get them to a medical professional, and then think about, do they have anything more than the clothes that are on their backs, literally. And then as far as case management, there are licensed social workers who are there. There are psychologists and therapists who we partner with. Some of our volunteers at a less clinical level, we've had some volunteers who've gotten certified as a yoga instructor just to come in and do yoga with the women. We have one of our fellow volunteers who is an art therapist and does a lot of art and dance with the women. I myself have taken a couple of survivors to a boxing gym to do some self-defense training. And holy crap. I put on do you guys know what a red man suit is? It's like, okay, the Army guys know what this is. Yeah. I put on, it's like a padding suit. You kind of feel like you're a hockey player in a snowsuit all mixed up together. And they can throw a punch. Oh. That was a lot of fun for them. We'll take them on things like hiking trips, trips to farmers markets or Giants games or things in the city. Essentially, just trying to give them the basics of a normal childhood that many of them, even the ones who come into the adult shelter, they have not had a childhood at all. They have not had a way to have fun in any way at all. So they'll do things like they had a Bollywood night recently, or they did henna tattoos and did some Bollywood dancing. I was not part of that. Nobody wants to see me dance.
Man, I see your tattoo right there in your hand.
Yeah, that's right. Hasn't washed off yet. And then we do a lot of things like, okay, what's next? All right, what kind of professional aspirations do they have? Our most recent graduate went on to a career as a pharmacist assistant. We've had a lot of women who need everything from learning English to finishing up their GRE. In a couple of cases, people from overseas have simply wanted to return to their home country. And two and a half years ago, we actually helped a woman repatriate to her home country. Some of them have maintained contact with their actual families and have got back in touch with them. But we have people who come in as tutors. So everything from, we're always looking for pro bono services. And if you know anybody who is a dentist or a therapist or a graphic designer or web designer, we need help with that on our website. We always need people who are eye doctors. Thank you. I always mix up ophthalmologists and optometrists. If anyone is interested, if anyone has a professional service that they're thinking, hey, you know what, I'd love to do this for free, we're glad to have it. If you're interested in donating, and people are always a little nervous about asking for money, but I've learned in the time that I've talked to people, you know what, I've gone over it. I'm happy to ask for donations because I'm 100% convinced that you're going to feel good about where your contribution is going. I know Rotarians do a heck of a lot already for their community, so please, there's no pressure on this at all. But if you're interested, this is kind of some of the basic stuff that your contributions can do. I love this figure about $500 provides housing for 2 months. Now, obviously, keep in mind it's a group home. There's 8 beds in the Monarch, but living in the city of San Francisco, I'm like, holy cow, I can't find housing for 2 months for $500 any place. That's insane. Donation items, and I would say if you want to think about this around Christmas time, every time people go to the hotels and they come back with like little shampoo bottles, we have people who are doing that for a while. They put together these little care packages of just things as simple as, hey, it's paper towels and it's hand lotion and it's soaps and shampoos. Toiletries are, we run through them quickly. So anything that you guys might be interested in doing, keep that in mind. A couple of the upcoming events, we're a little late for the break-free run to end human trafficking. It was just this past weekend over in Lake Merritt. Huge success. A couple of other organizations other than Freedom House were there. There's a group called Missy in Oakland, which is missing endangered, sexually exploited youth. They do a lot of work with young women in the Alameda County area. That was a great success, and again, a great way for a lot of our partners to come together. We have a holiday giving campaign coming up that'll kick off November 17th, I believe, and run through a week after Christmas. And of course, the one thing I would say, please put this on your calendar because this is just a fun event. Every year we have the Freedom House Gala and Charity Auction right down in Foster City. That is going to be early May, I believe. So put that in the back of your minds right now. We'll send some information to you if you want to sign up on the sign-up sheet. And if you're interested in being a volunteer, we have our next volunteer training session coming up in March. With items here, if you want to jot down our website, freedomhousesf.org. If you're not so motivated to sign the sign-up sheet today, please don't worry about it. If a day and a half later you think, hey, I want to check out this website and see what this is about, freedomhousesf.org. And that's our mission statement. Pretty basic. Hope, restoration, and a new life for human trafficking survivors. I can't think of a more worthy goal than that. Some emergency resources, and I promise this is my last slide. The best of all of these, I think, is probably the best one-stop shop is that National Human Trafficking Hotline, 888-3737-888. That is the national resource, and all of our law enforcement agencies in this area have tie-in to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. Are there any questions that you guys might have for me about Freedom House or about human trafficking? Yes?
I'm wondering, as far as the history of the United States and trafficking, like when did it start? I mean, I'm watching this Boardwalk Empire, they talk about the underground for booze and
Right.
they're doing cocaine that show that.
Yeah, well, I think there's an easy answer and a complicated answer. The easy answer is it started from, the very beginning. As a nation, we obviously have a very troubling history of institutionalized slavery, and we built our country on that for years and years and years. Native Americans obviously got the short end of the stick a number of times, including enslavement, labor trafficking, right from the very beginning. But that was kind of legally recognized. So I would say criminal trafficking, as long as prostitution has been around, I know that there are some willing participants in prostitution. I'm not going to paint this so broad a brush as to say that every person who's involved in commercial sex is doing so against their will, but it's easily, most women do not choose that. And it's probably the oldest crime that we've got. Exploiting another person, I think, is bigger than the history of the United States and even the written history of the world. But I will say also, the drug trade definitely exacerbated that. So from the 50s and onwards, as we saw heroin abuse morph into cocaine and then crack, drug abuse is a vector for human trafficking and a way for gangs to exploit that. So that is a very broad answer. Anything else? Anyone else? Yes, sir.
What percentage of the women will go back to that former life after they've been in your...
It's a great question. It does happen from time to time. I don't have a statistic on that. It is a very low percentage we've seen from Freedom House. So I don't have a solid number for this, but I can tell you that the longer a woman will stay with Freedom House or with any organization that's providing them support, the less chance they have of returning to that. The only one that I know of recently where someone has returned to a situation that is probably abusive, if not trafficking, is someone who only stayed for a month and a half and left of her own will. It was not, kicked out or released, just close to kind of running away. Once people are at Freedom House, it's not like a guaranteed success model, but very, very few. It's like for many of these people, it's the only way they knew to provide for their own family. And it's the only job that's available 24/7 anywhere you go. So if they're wrestling with a drug addiction problem especially, they're certainly vulnerable to returning to it. And that does happen from time to time.
Have you ever, excuse me, Matthew, we're going to take a short break, close the meeting, and continue with this conversation.
Yes, sir.
Would you all stand, please? We have a raffle.
Thank you, Matthew.